Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Hi. My name is Jennifer Zanoli, and I'm the Director of Museum Experiences and Community Engagement here at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. I want to thank you for being here for today's program, which is Common Ground Arts and Culture Community Stories. Common Ground is an oral history project and exhibition that has created an archive to celebrate the lived experience of SouthCoast residents. Our storytellers tonight have contributed to the project, and I'm very excited to have them here tonight to continue to tell their stories. So thank you so much for being here. Now, helping us to share these stories is a very special guest host that we have, which is Dr. Akia de Barros Gomez. Akia is the Senior Curator of Maritime Social Histories at Mystic Seaport Museum, as well as the Director of the Frank C. Munson Institute of American Maritime Studies, and is the visiting scholar at Brown University's Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice. From 2017 to 2021, Akia was the Curator of Social History here at the New Bedford Whaling Museum and was the person that started the Common Ground Project. I'm very excited to welcome her back, and we'll turn it over to her to tell you more about the project and to introduce our guests, our storytellers. Thank you.
Okay, it's working. Good evening, everyone. Oh, hi. Good to see everyone. I realized as I was walking over from the garage how much I miss New Bedford and how bittersweet it is to be the moderator for tonight's events. I will tell you that Common Ground began because as Curator of Social History here, confession, I had no formal training in how to work in a museum before I came to work here. By chance, they took a chance on me and hired me, and so I had to cheat my way through being a curator. And the way I did that was my training is in archaeology and anthropology. And so I would create all of these projects that were really anthropology projects that ended in exhibitions. Because of that background and because I was brought up by a grandmother and a mother that were storytellers, I mean stories all night and all day, and you know, when you're young, you don't really appreciate that. When you get older, you get upset with yourself for not listening. And I think that's part of the reason I became an anthropologist, part of the reason I love engaging in projects like this. Everyone has a story to tell. And in New Bedford, my thinking was, let me backtrack a little bit. Before COVID, I had a conversation with Michael Lapides, who unfortunately cannot be here, and I don't know what his title is now. Director of Digital Engagement. But whatever his title is, he's this amazing photographer and artist. And I said to him one day, wouldn't it be cool to just walk the streets of New Bedford and stop people and ask if we can take their pictures and ask them to tell us their story, sort of like a Humans of New York type thing, but it would be New Bedford. And we could create an exhibit, again, it's my anthropologist mind, we could create an exhibit called New Bedford Mosaic, and just have pictures up on the wall where we're telling all of these stories and you're seeing the interconnections and understanding everyone's lives. And we were gonna do it, and then COVID happened, and everything shut down. So we had to shift gears. And what ended up happening is I did a call for stories that people could send in, you know, through snail mail, through email, and Zoom. Lots of interviews on Zoom. And we started collecting these stories and then doing Zoom sort of conferences. And Ron, I think you were part of the first one. And something really amazing happened in that first Zoom conversation. I don't know if you remember. I purposefully picked a very diverse group from different areas of New Bedford, from different communities in New Bedford. And once we were all in that space talking, everyone had a relationship with everyone else in the room because they knew the person's parents, or one of the women who grew up very wealthy, right? And way far removed from Bay Village was a camp counselor in Bay Village and was the camp counselor of one of the other storytellers on that call. And so I got the sense that, yeah, I think we're onto something. This is a really good idea. And unfortunately, I wasn't here to see it through, so I'm very grateful that Beatrice asked me to come back tonight, because New Bedford is a city that is near and dear to me, not only because of the work I did here at the Whaling Museum, but this is where my family migrated to from Cape Verde. And part of my family's story is in our collection. And what an awesome place to have your family's story held. And if I think about my family is New Bedford. Ethnic, loud, the food is always good, the music's always good, the dance is always good. A lot of people are afraid of it because they don't know the beauty that's within it. And so I think from our storytellers, some of whom I had the fortune to work with, Ron as an artist, Allison as an artist, you'll get that from their stories. So I'm so pleased to be able to introduce them and moderate tonight. Our first storyteller is Allison Wells, and I'm not going to tell you anything about her. I'm going to let her story speak for itself.
Hello. Okay, everybody's hearing me? Yes. All right. So usually when I meet new people, there's always someone to ask me, what does someone from Trinidad and Tobago in a tropical island, what would bring them to a place like this in New England, so cold? Like, why would you be in a cold place like this? And I make the joke every time, and I say, well, because, every single time winter comes along, I ask myself the exact same question. But then when it goes, I'm like, oh, that was just a bad dream, and then I love it again. But the truth is, I came here 18 years ago to do my master's degree in fine art painting at UMass Dartmouth. And every time someone asks me that question of why did I come to such a cold place, I always remember the greeting I got when I came here. And what happened was people were so concerned about if I was going to be cold, if I was going to be okay. And usually, it really shocked me because I thought that was the sweetest thing. Usually when people are accustomed to something, they're not really aware that people who are not accustomed, how they would feel. But when I got to UMass, everybody was very concerned. They took me under their wing. I had a professor who bought me a heater, a little space heater for my studio. And I was like, oh, this is so nice. She said, the studios get cold, and I don't want you to be cold. So they got me that. And my other friends had other studios, and they were like, well, what about us? We're chopped liver. And then I had another friend who was in one of my classes, and he told his mother that I was from the Caribbean, and she made me a blanket, a quilted blanket. I never met her. She didn't know who I was, and she made me this blanket. 18 years I have this blanket. It's all shredded now. And I love it because it reminds me of the warmth that I got. I had some of my other friends were like, Allison, is that your only winter jacket that you have? And I'm like, yes, why? They're like, we're taking you to Savers. And so I was introduced to Savers, and I got my first winter coat. But these are examples of how I felt so welcome, so warm, when I came to this area and when I was at UMass. And this continued when I graduated from UMass. I became part of the arts culture community, and I had my own little studio upstairs of no problemo. And I loved it. And so time went on. I became more and more part of the community. And this is fast forward to, I graduated in 2007, fast forward to 2014. And I got an artist grant, my very first artist grant. And I decided I was going to get some materials and equipment and all of this. And right at that time, and I'm a person that believes in science, right at that time, in the same building, the Cummings building, downstairs on the ground floor, a place opened up. One of the stores opened up. And someone told me about it, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I can open my own gallery. That was a dream I had since I was 5 years old. And So I'm like, but I'm not sure, I'm nervous, imposter syndrome, goes in and all of that. But I decide, okay, the grant came, that's my sign. So I use the grant and I'm planning on this, I'm starting to do all the work, and I decide I'm opening this gallery. And again, the community comes out. People are congratulating me. People are saying, you need any help? You need this? I get a call from Gallery X. And they're like, Allison, I heard you're opening a little gallery. We're so proud of you. That is wonderful. Do you need track lighting? I'm like, what? Do I? 2 weeks before that, I was looking through and pricing track lighting. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to take my whole grant. And then 2 weeks later, I get this call. They're like, we just did over our track lighting, and we have tracks, we have canisters. Now we're just, I don't want it to have to throw it away. I need somebody to have it. So these are the little things. I'm like, what? So I get the track lighting. Again, somebody else comes to me. They're like, do you need, I'm closing my shop. I have a card holder. Do you sell cards? Yes, I just started to sell my note cards, and I usually sell them in a little basket. None of them would sell in the basket. I put it in the card rack, and they were all going like crazy. So everybody was coming in, would you like this? Oh, this would be lovely in your gallery. So again, these are two little stories of how I felt so welcome, how the community has taken care of me. I felt when I was opening my gallery like it takes a village, right? And everybody was contributing and helping. And that is how I feel. I tell people all the time, New Bedford has treated me well. And I feel really at home, I feel like a part of it. So I just want to say thank you for having me and for me to tell a little bit of my story today. Thank you. And now I'm going to pass it on to the next storyteller, Ron.
Thank you so much. This is a really interesting thing. Everything's come full circle. I first met Dr. Gomes on that Zoom. We began this project. I spoke about my mother. My mother was a father singer. She was a father singer in the 50s and 60s. Dr. Gloria Dessau says that she may be the only documented father singer of her generation that we know of. And there's two of them altogether. One is in the Women of the Light, I believe that's the part of the museum's programs. Anyway, my mother's going to be 97 in September. And so a few years back, I saw a newspaper clipping from Mary Jean Blasdale, who was the then curator, I think it was 1986, of the New Bedford Whaling Museum. And I thought it was intriguing. She had a list of 125 names. She wanted information on these artists, a birthday, anything. So I clipped it out. Go ahead in time. My friend, my boss, my co-founder of the Artist Index, we were discussing this, that, and the other, and I mentioned Mary Jean Blasdale, who eventually wrote the Artists of New Bedford, a biographical dictionary. It covers from 1749 to 1949. And so we decided we were going to do the Artist Index, which is a community digital archive. The first person that I did write an article on was about my mother, because the whole impetus of this entire thing was not just the stories. Stories are great only if they're handed down. If they don't get handed down, they die, okay? And because of that, all these things started going into motion. It's so important to keep telling these stories. And now as I'm getting a little older, I think I'm getting a little smarter, because now I'm realizing, oh my gosh, I can go to all those clubs where my mother used to sing, here in New Bedford. Now, she sang from Lowell, the furthest that I can remember up north, all the way down to Elizabeth, New Jersey. She sang on the same stage as her hero, Amália Rodrigues, the Rainha de Fados. Okay, she was the queen of fados. In fact, my mother was called Little Amália because they said she emulated her so much that it was phenomenal. I remember as a child, my mother left my father when I was quite young, took me with her to New York. We lived with her uncle, Luís Antunes. Luís Antunes was another character. He founded 6 Portuguese language newspapers in New Bedford. One of them that I can remember is Voz do Imigrante. Okay, that was handed down to, Voz do Imigrante still exists as a radio program. So all that really, really kind of interesting history. And she tried to make a career in New York. It just wasn't going to work. She was a single mother. I have these memories because I still tell people I can sleep on anything, because I used to sleep on folding chairs under people's jackets in these Portuguese clubs. Some of them I realized later probably were not legal, because not every place has a bar that you could only get to through a trap door in the floor. And, you know, memories pop up in my head of she was doing a performance, and this man shouted out, "That girl can sing!" And my mother reminded me that I got up as an indignant, precocious child, put my hands on my hips and said, "That's no girl, that's my mother," you know, in Portuguese. So all of these memories. So now we've got her as the fadista, we've got her journey, we've got Mary Jean Blasdale, who inspired me to clip out that newspaper ad that she was looking for to get information to create the book that she eventually wrote. Jeff Watton and I get together by chance. We formed the Artist Index. We're pushing 160 podcasts so far. We've just actually, tomorrow, Carl Simmons' podcast will be dropped. He's being interviewed by Scott Bishop. Was it Jeff? Yep. Oh, okay. So all this is coming full circle. And Dr. Gomes's influence on this entire project has been phenomenal, because it all meshes together. Everything is woven together. And that is the amazing part of the story, is how we have this synergy that continues on. I'm hoping that we can continue as the Artist Index to document more people, because what happens, as in the case with my mother, when she dies, as much as I fear that, because I didn't realize how lucky I am to have a mother who's going to be 97. So every time I call her, she retired and moved back to Portugal. Every time I call her, the phone rings, and it's 4 times, 5 times. Oh, please answer the phone, And as I was telling Dr. Gomes, "Estás bem? Are you good?" That's all I want to hear, But when I go, she dies again. So that is why it is so important to tell these stories, to tell them to your kids. I was just telling, I think, Carl, you listen to these stories, and your 5-year-old brain interprets them one way. Then you hear that story, and your 9-year-old brain interprets it another way. And then you get to be 70 years old, and you're going, "Oh, wait a minute. There's all these weird gaps." And, you try to put them on timelines, and it doesn't jive. So that's pretty much about it. It's really, really important to tell stories, to listen to stories, and to document them. I was just thinking today, I'm going to get together with my cousins to discuss my father's side of the family, the 3 brothers. Their mom died when my father was 3 years old of tuberculosis from working in the mills, the textile mills. And, the old-fashioned thing of writing everything down in a journal and writing these stories, to heck with that. Let's just record what we're saying to each other. because now we have the technology to have it all transcribed, and we don't have to do all that writing. You know, even though you might like writing into a ledger with a fountain pen, you know. So with that in mind, thank you very much. I hope I pretty much put it all together. Our next guest is going to be Victor Fonseca.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Evaristo Victor Fonseca, known as Victor. I was born and raised here in New Bedford, South End, 1945, so I'm from the doo-wop era. But we had a beautiful, beautiful neighborhood downtown, and Water Street was like downtown. Stores, theaters, grocery, park, everything was going on. And my neighborhood was like another city. All big family, with a lot of love and compassion. And one street, from Water Street to County Street, we had 20 stores. Market, barroom, pool rooms, cobbler, freight, doctor's office, laundromat. So it was interesting, a nice neighborhood. And downtown we had a romantic atmosphere, especially Christmas time. All the decorations, every storefront had a Santa Claus. They would play chimes. And on a Saturday, you couldn't move downtown. It was so crowded, you had to go in the street to get around. But that was the time. And living in my neighborhood, summertime, we sit outside, play street games, and we had all kind of stores, and at night it would be so quiet, we hear a group of guys singing doo-wop. And that was a memory. People sitting outside talking, and my grandson said, you go to the store, don't talk to nobody. But I couldn't help it. I see you, I see you, I see you, I see you. And I get yelled at. I told you, but you can't help it. That was the neighborhood, you know? And our biggest fear then was be home before the street lights. Yeah, and now times change, but I got good memories, and thank you. And don't forget, be home before the street lights, okay? Our next speaker.
Hello, everybody. My name's Carl Simmons. I'm a local artist, as Ron said. But hearing Victor and Allison, in a previous life, I also owned a video store downtown, Simmons Brothers Motion Picture Company. Now Victor remembers who I am. We would pick out Victor's movies for him, have him under the counter, and he came in, and we'd have Victor's movies ready to go. We had his taste down. Me and my brother. But that was kind of the first introduction to New Bedford as a community that I had, the William Street, and we were on Purchase before that, and just the business community, which is hard to have a downtown business, as we can speak to. I'm here because mostly Michael Lapides asked me to contribute something to the exhibit to do with an archaeological dig I did at Brooklawn Park of Daniel Ricketson's shanty site. We did that 2014, 15, and 16, I believe. During the summer, Holly Herbster at PAL volunteered to come down, and my friend and colleague Bob Maker was a part of that as well, as historian. And so my big thing was telling Daniel Ricketson's story about his, he owned the estate, which became Brooklawn Park, part of it. And he was good friends with Henry David Thoreau, and Henry David Thoreau spent a lot of time in New Bedford, and weeks at a time. And that's kind of a lost story. Ron touched on the lost things, and we don't really talk about what an amazing thing. We all go to Walden to enjoy that, but we kind of have our own version of that here, and it's a public park. And we did the dig, and found a lot of stuff, and the library is the repository for those objects. But I could talk about Danny Ricketson for way too long, and I won't do that. But I wanted to touch on the idea that that kind of gave me a place in the community. I started doing that, and it gave me an excuse to come here literally, and like bug Michael Lapidus about some photos that they only have the glass negatives of. Or I lived on the 3rd floor of the library for a long time, basically, when Janice Hodgson was the interim, she was the art curator, but had everything thrown on her plate at one time when Paul Sear was no longer working. But, then I met Ann Lauro, the preservation planner, and these people taught me how to record history and how to do it right. Our version of right, and not just bend it to our wills, but also know what we don't know what we might never know. Even through efforts of collecting these stories, there'll always, especially when we're talking about our abolitionist past, that was a secret past, So it's very hard to get those stories, but we try. But I did want to touch on that. I've kind of become a bit of I don't like to use the word historian, but a bit of a local historian, I'm comfortable saying. And basically, I've just gotten a whole bunch of friends out of it. More than I have collected these stories, I've created these bonds with the people that are alive now, and we're all working toward this common goal of remembering our past. But you create these bonds that are really the kind of gold in this work that I've been doing. The bearded man there with the hat, that's Walton Ricketson, son of Daniel Ricketson. Just wanted to point that out. All roads lead to Walton Ricketson is a phrase I say often. But I think that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for having me here. And hopefully we can enjoy the rest of the program. Thanks.
Those were great, and I can tell you that was so surface level of the stories that each of the storytellers has to share. And so maybe you'll get a few more out of them as we transition to Q&A. So I'd like to invite all of the storytellers up to the front. And I believe Beatrice, has a microphone if you have any questions, want any of the storytellers to elaborate, or want them to share anything. Now is your chance.
Thank you, Beatrice. Ron, I had a question. You said that you spoke to your mom quite often on the phone. Does your mom still sing?
No, it's as she's gotten older. I think she sang once in the last 5 or so years. And Anna Vinagre and Joe Vinagre, they had a house, believe it or not, just one street over from where my mother lives in Praia de Buarques, in Figueira da Foz. And Joe, every time they'd go there, he'd say, Ron, I looked and looked and looked, and I can't find your mother's house. It's, I said, it's really, really simple. It's Travessa, And he calls me up from Portugal one day, and he says, I can't believe it. I was really I was really, really agitated. I stopped, I looked up, and what do I see but your mother's address? So I went to go see her, and he said, I actually got her to sing. And he said she's still got that power in her voice. Now, she was in her late 80s, early 90s when that happened. So, but she just doesn't want to talk about it. I know there's recordings. I've spoken with Paulina and Henry. As I get older and I'm trying to advance my practice as a painter, I can feel the pain that she had. She had to give it up because she was a single mom. And then the part I didn't get to in my story was when she married my stepfather in '64, he was a fisherman, and Fadistas weren't considered the type of girl that you marry. You know, they had this reputation, false reputation, but they had this reputation. So she had to give it up for the sake of that marriage. So with that, everything all came crashing down on her. You're welcome. Thank you for asking.
We're recording, so it'd be great to get you on.
Hello, my name is Cynthia, and I know Allison's story real well, and I know Victor's story real well, so I'd like to ask each of them a question. Allison, I know when you came here and you decided to stay here and everybody was just so kind to you, how has the community, since you've been here and have your own business, how have they helped you want to stay here and continue to do your business? I know I go to contribute to your business, which is wonderful, but how do you feel the community has done that?
Definitely. It's just an extension of what I explained before. People feel really excited about the steps I took to get where I am, and they want to see it continued. So as I said, you know, Gallery X reached out, other people reached out, and I didn't mention Gallery X had reached out another 3 or 2 years ago, saying, oh, we have a lot, do you need another card holder? But this is a huge one, you know, that floor right up. I'm like, sure, bring it. So if any of you have been to my gallery and have turned that beautiful large card holder, it was from Gallery X as well. And other people have really come through and I just felt a overwhelming support. And you know what was interesting too? During the pandemic, in the early to the lockdown, people were very concerned about the artists, the small businesses in downtown New Bedford. And so when you saw, like in maybe 2021, when we were starting to like venture out a little bit and then pull back in and venture out, people really were making an effort to support local businesses, to support their own, to support the artists. And I felt that so much. People were coming into the gallery. They were sending me messages, asking, do I need anything? And so I really felt a nice, warm feeling, especially at that time, because that was a tough time for all of us. So knowing that the community, not just coming out before when things were good, but when things are tight, they were coming out and extending that hand to all of us artists and small business people. So that's how I felt.
Thank you. And I was privileged, my husband and I, to meet your parents who are no longer here when they did come to visit. So that was wonderful. And Victor?
Yes.
Obviously, we've known each other almost all our lives. What I want to ask you is, in the community, we know, or I don't know if everybody here knows, that you teach dancing and you teach aerobics, and almost everybody in the city have at one time or another gone to your classes, and you still do these classes at the YMCA. Yeah. So how has this impacted you? And I always thought, you're such a good dancer, that I always thought that given the opportunity, you could be on Broadway. But how has this impacted you in the community by the reception that you get from the people?
I take it as a compliment and a blessing, because I touch so many people that I don't even know. And they would stop me and say, oh, I used to go to your class, I used to go to you, oh, you're Victor. So it's a compliment. Yeah, it makes me feel good. Even at the baker, that's all I hear. Victor, oh my God, I used to go to you, used to work us, but I left a good impression. And at the baker, I met some nice people, nice friends, and then in the audience, raise your hands. Well, thank you.
I have a question. You've all spoken about your connection to the community, and I know you all. So my question is, in the time of social media, have you had those communications or those community connections deepened through social media? I know Ron and Carl are very involved in the New Bedford Historic Mass Photo Club, and I'm fascinated by the crowdsourcing of information that takes place there, and we've had discussions about that, Carl and I. But could you just, all of you, I know you all have social media pages, and how does that work for you now?
Well, I was definitely on social media before, and it has increased a lot more again because of the pandemic. But I did see a huge increase in people, coming toward me, trying to support as much, again, through the pandemic. The social media really, because during the pandemic, my business had to pivot, like many people's businesses, and it went online because they're home and nobody can go out. My gallery was closed. And so that, for me, I ramped up my presence on social media because I was doing these little courses online, and they're like, at this point, you have to jump ahead because you can easily get forgotten, because now we don't have brick and mortars open, so you have to. So I made an effort to ramp it up a bit, and it really did help my business. Like my online, I never really had an online, like my online store. I actually had an online store, but I never did any business on it. People would come to the gallery, and it was very local. But then, for the first time, it expanded internationally. It expanded all through the US. And so I noticed that really did help, and I really made an effort to pivot my business in that sense. So definitely it has. Thank you.
Well, there's really no substitute for this, for sitting at a bar, sitting at a table after an Eastern meal. But social media has helped quite a bit, because especially during the pandemic, let's face it, it was even people who are introverted hated it, because there was no release at all. My second marriage, I inherited a huge family from Detroit, and because of the pandemic, coupled with social media and the increased need for social media, I made connections online that were just phenomenal, and they continue to grow. So it does have that thing, but my wife, who's in Detroit now for a funeral, she had dinners at several relatives' houses, and said, "Oh my God, sitting around the table listening to those stories," and the stories from her family are just they're historical. She said it just set something off of and I could tell by the sound of her voice. So we've got to remember, we've got to talk. Working with Carl, you get older, you remember certain things, but you're like, I don't know, that's kind of fuzzy. But then again, you had a 9-year-old brain when you saw that. Victor was talking about South Water Street, 999 South Water Street. I mean, I went to Catholic school up until the 7th grade. So, standing out there at Silverstein's, waiting to get your school uniform. There was Krautwurz, one of the best bakeries in town. I mean, it goes on and on. Brownell's piano place. There was the Royale. There was the Orpheum, and it just goes on. And as you get older, you start wondering, are there mind games going on? Do I really remember these things, and how do I remember them? And that's what's important. You were talking about doo-woppers. I mean, where my wife comes from, they had doo-woppers there, but they also had these nasty 4 policemen called the Big Four, who used to roust people from their stoops. All they were doing was singing. So, one story leads to another and another, and it continues on.
And I'll be brief because I know you mostly want to hear from the artists, but I will say this started on social media because of COVID, right? We weren't able to go out into the community and collect stories, so I created a Facebook page, friended everyone I knew from the museum. Like, I would literally sit there and type in people's names and see if they popped up, and would post little snippets of stories, would post little videos of stories, would ask people for stories, would dig into our standard hour. I'm no longer here, but when I was here, I would dig into the Standard Times collection and post pictures of individuals, usually from circa 1905, because that was a time of increased immigration, and I would post the story and try to relate it to today. So there's one that sticks in my mind of a woman who, she was kicked out of her home, and it's a picture of her in the Standard Times with 3 children. They probably weren't her children because she was quite old. And the story was about how a company, I think a cotton dyeing company or something, had purchased her home, and they were kicking her out. And it was the day that they were coming with the cranes and the wrecking ball or whatever they were using to dismantle the house. And she's sitting there with the 3 children and all of her worldly possessions. And I did a little research into her, and it turned out she was a midwife from like Georgia or South Carolina that had moved up here. And so I posted that picture and her story and talked about the fact that housing insecurity is still with us. This is a story of housing insecurity from like 1915, and invited people to share those stories. And so really through social media, I was able to keep the momentum going because we didn't have the design yet. It wasn't fleshed out yet what we were gonna do with the project, but I wanted to keep people talking and the stories coming. So thanks to social media, which is a blessing and a curse sometimes, we were able to get this project off the ground when we were all locked behind closed doors at home.
A lot of tendrils going off on what to touch upon here. But that photograph was taken probably on what is Sears Court now, where Saltmarsh's was. So it's a place. That's a fascinating thing about all these photographs that we have. They're all real people, and they're all real places that are still we can still go visit. To touch on Anne's question twofold. Yeah, social media is great for sharing information, sharing these stories, like the story of Jane Gallagher, a fighter for textile workers' rights or something, who's talking about that. I can just post from my dining room, about this, and people start talking, remembering these figures that need to be remembered. I always, not to play devil's advocate, but there's a lot of misinformation too when you go on social media, and I had to kind of step back from the group and mentioned because of that. That happens a lot too. How much is our real history and how much is folklore, and which is valid and which is not. They both are. Are they cobblestones or are they Belgian blocks? They're cobblestones, but they're not cobblestones. So we could have that debate all day. And what's that? Yeah. So, when does it become a part of the vernacular? What do we just call them? Another part of social media for me that ties into this that I didn't touch on when I spoke before, with Instagram, I kind of blossomed as an artist through social media because of Instagram. Just taking pictures of myself in costumes in my living room, but as historical New Bedford figures. And I found that I kind of became very interested in New Bedford history. I was an artist before that, but then once I found New Bedford history, it's just this endless well of great stories. And with my history practice, I try to be very particular. But with my art practice, I'm wearing like a paper bag on my head and pretending it's a top hat. So it's a very different world. But yeah, social media has been great, and it's also a blessing and a curse, as we say. Yeah.
Thank you all. We have time for one last question, if anyone has any additional questions.
New Bedford and the SouthCoast is a very diverse area. We've had many different cultures, many different groups move in for over 100 years. So it seems like any newspaper you pick up and read these days, or any news you hear, diversity and class issues, and there's issues every day. So I was wondering, how do you feel? How do you see New Bedford and the diversity in New Bedford, and how has it contributed to what New Bedford or what the South Coast is now?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a shot. My wife is from Detroit, as I said, and getting to know people and getting people to know me, they're absolutely shocked that this is the town where Frederick Douglass came to freedom. Moby Dick, and it just goes on and on. In fact, Tracy Glab, who is the director of the Flint Institute of Art, happened to be in Boston. She's a Facebook friend. She posted she was there, and I said, "Hey, come on down here and check out the Reframing Landscapes. It's an absolutely drop-dead gorgeous show." She said, "I didn't know. I don't have the time." I said, "Well, next time you come down towards this way, just let me know." So there's the interconnectivity and such, but the diversity. Okay. Again, being old enough to know from a day and age where a French-Canadian father and a Portuguese mother was not a normal kind of a thing. You just didn't do that. You didn't marry out of your own sort of thing. Living in New York with my mother in Spanish Harlem, I lived in a completely diverse, environment. Coming here to New Bedford, we have both sides of this coin. We have incredible diversity on one side, and we have incredible ignorance on the other side. Let's just put it that way. We all suffer for our ethnicity and our culture and our backgrounds and so on and so forth. But comparative to other places to live in, I'm pretty proud to say that I come from New Bedford. It's as simple as that. And outsider, insider, or inside, outsider. What do you think?
Yes, definitely. I felt, yes, I was definitely blessed to be in such a diverse area. I didn't know much about the area. I tried to do a little history, and I didn't know much until I arrived here for my studies. And, I say this all the time. I was very adamant. I was coming here to do a 3-year program in 2 years and get the hell out. And here I am 18 years later. And I think that has a lot to say for the area, the art, the diversity. And, I'm from the Caribbean. So there's a lot of diversity there as well. And so I just feel such at home, so much culture, so much energy, and the arts, of course. And so that's definitely how I feel about this area.
Thank you, everyone. I have a question for Victor. Where did you get those fabulous socks? I need to know.
What was the question again?
Your socks. Where did you get those fabulous socks?
Satin doll. Okay.
I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for contributing your stories. Our exhibit upstairs is open, and we invite you all, if you haven't done so already, to contribute your stories. We'll have some refreshments out in the Jacobs Family Gallery. Please do join us, and thank you again for coming. One last thing. This is the first of 3 of these conversations in storytelling. The next one is on immigration, and then we have another one on activism. So keep an eye on your emails, because we'll be sending out the details of those. Paulina will be a storyteller. There's a few others in the room. Do join us for those as well. And thanks again for coming. Have a great evening.